Okay, dear speakers, dear participants, welcome back. We're proceeding with our program for today, and I am very pleased to announce our next session, as this is the session that will be delivered by the partner of this conference, good friends of the Ukrainian Catholic University, the Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas. And the topic for the discussion is very intriguing, and I believe we will have deep and insightful conversation. And I'm happy to invite the moderator of this panel, Sister Helen Alford, Vice-Rector of the Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas. Dear Sister Helen, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your kind introduction. Well, I would like to begin by saying I'm really delighted that our university, the Pontifical University of St. Thomas in Rome, often known as Angelicum, can contribute a session in this exciting and important conference in a series on such a great title, Integral Human Development in the Digital Age. Let me therefore begin by congratulating the Ukrainian Catholic University on promoting this conference series, and especially for choosing this year's topic, poverties, migrants, pandemics, and the idea of a new social ethics. This title shows me, at least, that UKU has understood what I hope all universities should have understood, that the pandemic is just the latest of many crises, and I want to come back to that word, crisis, in a moment. Crises of poverty and migration, and now the pandemic. And they're all giving us a clear signal that we need to do something new with ethics. And I want to come back to that word new as well, because that's very important for our project as well. Let me just give you a little bit of background to the genesis of this project, because it comes out of the crisis itself and helps us understand why the project is the way it is. So when the lockdown struck us in Italy last year, and we'd already had to go away from in-person classes a week before that, we knew that the consequences for our university in particular were going to be severe. Just one statistic will tell you, 90% of our student body comes from outside Italy. So we knew that we were going to see reductions in inbound student numbers. We looked at Australia and New Zealand, who at the same time were struggling to recruit students for the beginning of their new academic year. So we knew that we would have reductions in students, this would mean reductions in courses, and this would mean probably helped by the fact that we have a Polish rector. I mention this in particular because, of course, we think of Poland and Ukraine as in tension, but also together. I think they're like, we must think about fraternity now, you know, after Pope Francis's encyclical Fratelli Tutti. And I think of Poland and Ukraine as brothers. They fight a lot, but they're close to each other too. So I mention in particular that he's Polish because we are in Ukraine. So we have a Polish rector, and I think our response was perhaps influenced by that, following the example of the Polish shipyard workers who 40 years ago this year, 1981, launched their movement of solidarity. We thought this is our only response, solidarity. So we approached that wonderful foundation that has been mentioned already in our session that helps so many of us and does so much good work, Porticus, to see if they would work with us to set up a program of research that we wanted to call Crisis itself, but crisis not only because it's referring to the pandemic and other crises, but also because it's an acronym for what we wanted to do in response to the crisis. The acronym being Christian Responses in Solidarity to Crisis. The IS at the end of crisis makes the acronym. So apart from the importance of responding to the crisis itself, creating new knowledge through our research that could help cope with the crisis, the church, the world, society as a whole, and also to support our professors through the difficult time that we knew we were going to have to face. The program also has another crucial idea behind it, which I would like to mention briefly. And that is because we are a university with a unifying philosophical, theological as well, but especially philosophical scheme behind us, which I think most people today would call Aristotelian Thomistic, we have a chance to develop interdisciplinary research in a way that I think other universities might even envy. We can get the disciplines to talk to each other and work across their disciplinary differences, producing results, producing solutions for problems which are always integral on the basis of this integral vision. And I'd like to emphasize that this integral vision does not close us down or narrow our vision, as I hope you'll see from the panel today, where we'll have references to many Greek philosophers, to Sartre, to Heidegger, lots of other modern interesting thinkers today. This integral vision rather allows us to open up to a vast array of riches that can be found in the academic world around us in a way that allows us to still keep an identity, to not break down into many disintegrated fragments that are not able to come together and inform each other, that are potentially in conflict, or perhaps even worse, quite unable to relate to each other at all. So with that background, we launched the Crisis Programme October 2020, 11 research projects involving over 60 researchers, 1/3 of them from outside the university, and most of the post-professors involved from the vulnerable categories that risked losing courses that we were talking about. Each of the projects will complete their work in July, at the end of July, July 31, 2021. And so we today are presenting interim results of our project so far, with publication in the second half of 2021 or in some cases early 2022. It's because we want to contribute to the developing knowledge base to help us deal with the crisis, but also because 2021 is a special year for the Dominicans. It's 800 years since the Dies Natalis, the birth into heaven, the birth into eternal life, the death of Saint Dominic. So it's extremely symbolic for us to launch this program, to be part of this great response that the academic world is giving to this crisis now in the context of this Jubilee year for us. Let me just give you a couple of other titles of other projects. I just mention them because I think it gives hope to people to hear these titles. One of them is Understanding Ecclesial Communion in a Time of Social Distancing, Challenges for Worship, Evangelization and Ecumenism in the Pandemic. Very important topic for the different Christian traditions that we have. Another, the biggest project of all of them, is entitled Women's Response to Crisis, a re-examination of Roman cultural records and historical documents from early Christianity to the present day. And it's uncovering the stories of women who can be found in the cultural artifacts in the city of Rome, where we are, but whose stories haven't really been told. So to bring those to the fore to help us deal with the crisis today. A third project, a much more current one, responding to the global pandemic as a systemic crisis, the economy of Francesco as a paradigm for caring for our common home. That's obviously drawing on this new movement that really got going last year, the economy of Francesco. They are about to launch a call for papers for a volume on the topic, to which I hope many people following this conference and participating in it will choose to respond. It'd be wonderful to have participants in that book, that publication, as a result of this conference. And let me just mention one other before moving on to talk about our project. And that is because it's also close to the Ukrainian experience. The title of the project is Beyond COVID-19, Belarus as a Case Study of Welfare and Democracy in the Post-Soviet area. Now, of course, we might say case study of the lack of welfare and the lack of democracy in the post-Soviet area, but of course the project is in a hopeful mood. It's looking to the future. And of course, it's really important just to study where we are as well. Of course, we have researchers from Belarus involved in the project in order to help them too. I know that many other universities are also helping academics in Belarus, given the double crisis that they're facing now, not only the pandemic, but also the democratic crisis. And I'm sure UKU is involved in that too. So that's a bit of a background. So to come to our project, the first part of the title, Homo Novus, we come back to that word new, Novus. And then the subtitle, From Technological Captivity to New Freedom, new again, picking up this same idea, something new, based on the old, not denying the old, growing out of the old, but something new too. Now, the approach of the project is very simple. We decided that we were going to respond to a public intellectual who is working in the field of technology in relation to human freedom. So this would allow us to enter into dialogue with a really good academic, creating really good research results, but also allow us to respond to this person or these people, to bring the riches of our philosophical and theological tradition out to a wider audience. So we will have some meetings with one or more of these people as the project goes on, and we'll produce a joint book together at the end. So at the beginning of the project, we talked to Shoshana Zuboff, who's coming to the end of her career now. She's already emeritus from Harvard Business School, has an amazing publication set behind her. The most recent book, In the Age of Surveillance Capitalism, was the one that really interested us. And then another researcher who's an ex-Google engineer, James Williams, who had done a PhD in philosophy under the direction of Luciano Floridi, a very important philosopher of information in Oxford, connected also with our university, some of our projects. He had written a book, Stand Out of Our Light, Freedom and Resistance in the Attention Economy, and won the 9 Dots Prize for this book, which is an extremely valuable prize. And talking to the two of them, we found that James Williams was the one who was more interested in cooperating with us. So we've been focusing on his work up to now. But we were also trying to see if we could engage Byung-Chul Han in the project, an extremely interesting Korean-German thinker, and author of such illuminating books as Psychopolitics, Neoliberalism, and the New Technologies of Power, which came out in 2017. So, but anyway, right now, our project in its interim phase that it's in now is focusing on James Williams and on his book, Stand Out of Our Light. So I want to just say something briefly about his argument and then move on to something that I want to write in response to his book. I won't talk about the title, which is very interesting because Matthieu Raffray in his intervention will very expertly introduce it. Instead, I want to go to the end of Williams's book and read you the last sentence or the last couple of sentences. He says right at the end, in order to do anything that matters than ever, that the degree to which we are able and willing to struggle for ownership of our attention is the degree to which we are free. Because at the core of William's argument is the idea that in an information-rich world like our own, the scarce resource is our attention. And the big platforms like Facebook are competing with each other to attract as much of our attention as possible, this scarce resource, to looking at their websites and their activities so that they can sell as much advertising to us as possible. So his book falls into 3 parts. First part is laying out the problem and is called very illuminatingly, I think, websites and so on. The second part of the book, really interesting, we can't go into it. It's called Clicks Against Humanity, where he's analysing the sort of deeper, profounder effects on human beings that can come from being persistently, constantly, never-endingly distracted. And then the last section of the book, Freedom of Attention, is about how to respond to this problem or some ways of responding. So those of us who are old enough can remember that in the 1990s, there was a lot of interest in internet-based companies. People were investing in them a lot. They thought this was the new thing that was going to produce a lot of results. But in the end, these companies didn't produce anything. They weren't making any money. Their evaluations were going up and up because people had great expectations, but nothing happened. So that in the end, we had the bubble burst around 2000. We had what was called the dot-com bubble. These companies .com, because of course they were using a website which ended with the dot and the com. But very shortly after this crash, Google and some other companies discovered a way to make money out of the internet, because they realized that tracking what we do when we visit websites, whether we're looking for information, whether we're buying anything, whatever we're doing, tracking what we're doing, they can build a profile of who we are in terms of our interaction with the internet, which means then they can start to predict what we might do in the future. Really interesting information if you want to attract advertisers. But then there's even a third step that they go. They devised all kinds of mechanisms to persuade us to do what they predict we should be doing on the basis of our original profile. And we don't even realize this is happening. For us. So we get sucked in without even realizing what's happening. So the whole of their business model is set up on this basis. Everything they do is to attract our attention to their sites and sell as much targeted advertising as possible. You know, Facebook isn't a social network. It's a mechanism for selling advertising. That's what it's trying to do. Its customers are the advertisers. You know, we're just collateral part of it. And James Williams points out, whereas in the past, the main communication would be something else, but then you would find there would be interpolations, commercial breaks, or something like this, where advertising, adverts and commercials were shown in the middle of a television program or a radio program or so on. Now, with these platforms, the advertising is the communication, and all the rest of it, the social networking, that's just collateral around the outside, you know. And so, last point on this analysis, we have armies of some of the best engineers, designers, the best trained people in the world, spending the whole of their days trying to work out the most effective ways of undermining our ability to concentrate on something that matters and to attract us to looking at these websites and consuming this advertising using these techniques of persuasive technology, as they're called now. Well, my colleagues will say a bit more about, I'm sure, about Williams's book, but I think you already get some idea about what he's trying to do from this short synthesis. So I want to just end with what I am hoping to do with this in this project. And I want to start from a phrase of Wittgenstein's, which is quoted by Williams in his book. The phrase is, "The limits of my language are the limits of my world." Now, Williams quotes this phrase when he's trying to convince the readers that we are in a new situation. He's trying to say, don't just think we can use the same words, the same theories, the same ideas we did before. We are moving into a completely new situation. And he says quite bluntly, we lack the language to explain what's going on. And so, you know, if you start from a Wittgensteinian point of view, this is a really serious problem. We should be really concerned about what is new and how to try to formulate it, put it into words, articulate it, you know. But in order to do that, we need to know what really is new. And I think this is where I think there's something missing in Williams's book, which is a sense of the history of technology and what we can learn from the history of technology that can help us deal with this big technological change that we're dealing with now. And I'll just say one thing, just to be very brief about it. If you look at the long-range history of technology, say you start from Neolithic period onwards, you can see, and many historians use this, the most powerful writer, I think, who uses this idea is Lewis Mumford in his book Technics and Civilization. He talks about how there's basically two ways of designing technology, and they're constantly in tension with each other. And there's sort of a fight between them about which one is going to get the lead over the other. Now, Mumford talks about the first kind of technology. He says the oldest form he calls biotechnics. He's writing a long time before biotechnology, something to do with biotechnology. What does he mean by biotechnics? He means it's a form of technology that is inserted into a way of life. The way of life produces the frame that is around the technology, as it's around all the people who are part of this system. And the technology has a meaning, because it's brought into a whole world of meaning, the life of the people, the community in this area. And the technology in this sense is devised to make the life more productive or more full or more rich, to create more surplus, so that then people can spend more time, say, on their rituals or on their language or on their religious ceremonies or whatever else they really want to do, you know. So if you look at Neolithic times, I mean, he would say Neolithic technology is an example of biotechnics. One of the really important things the Neolithic peoples do is to create containers for food. Seems just obvious to us now, but it was a massive breakthrough at the time, because it allowed early Neolithic man to collect the harvest of his crops and keep the food, stop it being eaten by animals and stop it going off, keeping it good. They had to find ways of doing it. It was not easy. They had to learn how to do it. But they managed to solve this problem in a very effective way in that period. And then that allowed them to do a lot of other things. So you can see how that kind of technological development is working with human development. It's part of human flourishing. But then we have this other kind of development, the one that becomes dominant at the time of the Industrial Revolution, the one that the engineering profession inherits, because the engineering profession doesn't exist before the Industrial Revolution. And that is what Lewis Mumford calls monotechnics, what other people call technocentric. It's where the machine is in the center, and the machine doesn't have to have any meaning. It just has to be there. And so you hear people talking about how, well, we just have to allow technological development to go ahead. We mustn't be Luddite. We mustn't stand in the way. And then some people will say, well, we have to have some ethical control over technological development. But you'll always get the technology saying, but that's no good. You're holding us back. You know, the Americans saying, if you don't let us do it, the Chinese are going to do it, and all this kind of thing. You know, this sense that the technology is just going forward on its own in a kind of blind way, independently of us. And we have to organize our whole life around the technology. Instead of the life being the meaning and the container for the technology is dominating over the way of life. Now, that's not completely correct, because, in fact, what's going on behind the machine is that it's one group of people that's controlling another group of people through the machine. And this whole language about we have to go forward and we can't do anything else is part of the rhetoric to try to get everybody to think that that's the only thing we can do. But we don't have to design like this. We have got alternatives. And I would say, for instance, the green tech movement today, this idea that we have to change the way we design our technology so that it can insert itself into a sustainable relationship, a sustainable way of life with the planet. That's a kind of revival, again, of the biotechnics with regard to technology. So I think we need to just bring this kind of discussion into connection with what Williams is saying, with the topics that he's talking about. And then my second and last point is to think about the mindset of economic actors. You know, we know today that economics is the dominant discourse in our world. You know, when a government comes to the end of its mandate and we're going to elections, nobody says, did those politicians increase the representation of unrepresented people? Or, you know, did they include more marginalized people? Or all the kinds of things which politicians are supposed to be doing in terms of a political system. No, they say, what happened to GDP? All politicians are judged by what happens to economic growth while they're in position. And many of us are all judged by whether we are, contributing economically or not. It's one of the big problems, say, to do with women and care and the whole care issue. A lot of women don't want to be doing caring because they feel valueless. They have no value if they're not earning economic wealth. So economics is what gives value. It's what our society is about. Medieval society was about giving praise to God. It was a theologically dominated society. We are an economically dominated society. So if we can try to intervene in the mindset of the economic actors, maybe we can do something about this. And there's a very little charity in the UK that I want to use for this. It's called Blueprint for Better Business. It's working with big companies that are quoted on the UK Stock Exchange. The best example I can give you of the impact the Blueprint is having is to listen to a series of lectures that the BBC produces every year. They're called the Wreath Lectures. And the last set, which were given in December 2020, were provided by Mark Carney. Mark Carney recently retired as the governor of the Bank of England. And his lectures were under the title, How We Get What We Value. And I was amazed listening to those lectures because I was almost like it was someone from Blueprint speaking. Now, I know Mark Carney is very close to Blueprint, and I'm sure there's many other influences on his thought, but you could see many of the same things that we're saying in Blueprint is coming out there. And these guys are talking to the big board managers of these big companies. I've been in some of their sessions with them to try to support them. And I can tell you, these big executives, they're fascinated. They're just fascinated by what we can tell them. And I give you one example only, and then I must give up and hand on to my next panel member. What's the idea that most attracted to, or they repelled from, things they like or dislike, and it's all on the level of our sensitive capacities. It's sensual, sensuous, it's how we feel, it's emotion, it's stimulus and response often. That's more or less how they're thinking about people. They're reacting to people on that level. If you go into the boardroom and say, wait a minute, let's start thinking a different way. Let's think about human dignity. How could you, big business, who wants to have a purpose, all businesses want to have purposes now, you want to have a purpose. What would it look like if your purpose was based on human dignity and the common good? Think about what it means to treat people with dignity. You start to do what Wittgenstein was saying. The limits of my language are the limits of my world. You start to change their language. You start to bring a word like human dignity into the boardroom when they're doing their strategies, when they're thinking about, and you can start to widen the world, change the world they're in, help them think differently, help them do things differently. So I think this is another way of responding to what James Williams is doing, using the riches of the virtue tradition, Catholic social thought, the things that we can bring into the debate in a form that the person out in the street or the big business manager can accept, can deal with. Okay, so that is my little piece. So now I'm going to hand over, if this is okay with the organisers, to my second panel member here, Matthieu Raffray. He is a professor of philosophy in our faculty. He has a PhD in medieval philosophy from the Sorbonne. He also has higher degrees in theology and in mathematics. He is interested in various research areas. One of them is the philosophy of artificial intelligence, and he's been teaching also courses on that. So I'm really, really happy to hand over to you, Matthieu, to continue the presentation of our research results. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Sister Helen, for this first presentation, and I'm very happy to be a part of this conference. I would like to propose the point of view of ancient philosophy, ancient Greek wisdom, maybe to give some light to this question of human development in this digital age. So my presentation, the title of my presentation is Desire and Virtue in the Digital Age, a Socratic Approach. So as Sister Helen said, in his book, Stand Out of Our Light, James Williams offers us a rather anachronistic but very interesting comparison. Just as Emperor Alexander the Great had in Corinth in the 4th century BC, so as Emperor Alexander the Great had proposed to the philosopher Diogenes the Cynic to grant him any wish he desired, so the major digital firms of today maintain that they instantly fulfill all of our desires. Google satisfies our thirst for knowledge. Amazon stills our urge for possessions. And Facebook quenches our desire to communicate, not to mention sexual appetites, the lust for power, or our obsession with our outer appearance. Diogenes, however, that most unique thinker who resided in a barrel and whom Plato called a Socrates gone mad, refused Alexander's offer. Instead, he asked the emperor to stand out of his light. Like Diogenes, Williams calls on us to realize that by offering to fulfill our desires, the new technological means of communication and information are also, in a manner of speaking, standing in front of a light that is essential to our humanity, our attention. In the present age of information, our attention span has indeed become the most valuable asset that large firms can buy, profit from, and share. By usurping and monopolizing the light of our attention, and by transforming it into consumption, we have inadvertently become little more than mere being threatened, not by some invasive and coercive external power, but rather by our very own dependence on these digital solicitations. In order to reflect on this new form of enslavement, and in the hope of understanding what it says about us, I would like to pursue the anachronistic analogy just given and link up with another philosopher nearly contemporaneous with Diogenes, namely the great Socrates. Socrates opposed the sophists, who made their fortunes on the squares of Athens by selling their fictitious wisdom, Greek Sophia, to the city's youth. Faced with these dealers and presumed traders in wisdom, Socrates instead proposed a new type of insight, grounded in the pursuit of virtue for the good of our soul. Term orexis. So first point, the image of leaking jars. One of the most notorious sophists whom Socrates confronts is Gorgias of Leontini. In the dialogue that bears his name, written by Plato, we find a famous image used by Socrates, in which two men carry jars. One of them has a few jars filled with precious goods that were acquired, I quote, through much hard toil, while the other carries jars that, like unfulfilled desires, are always leaky and decayed. Socrates says, the soul of the thoughtless is likened to a sieve, and being perforated, since it is unable to hold anything by reason of unbelief and forgetfulness. Now, I believe that this image can be duly applied to the capacity for some of our current technology to continually satisfy our desires without ever fulfilling them, all the while keeping us in a state of perpetual solicitation. To borrow the words of Hans Jonas, we could call these modern technologies restless phenomena. Modern technology, writes Jonas, unlike its traditional counterparts, is an enterprise and not a possession, a process and not a state, a dynamic thrust and not a set of implements and skills. Indeed, the more elaborate and efficient the technological tools are, the more they create new needs that they aim and claim to please. This capacity to indefinite self-renewal is also representative of many tools of our times. The news, the stories, and the announcements on Facebook or Twitter that renew themselves with every reloading of a page, the endless suggestions for new videos on YouTube, the new people that may appear on Tinder, a new and potentially satisfying encounter always seems possible along with the next click. This infinite capacity to generate a need is based on what Hans Jonas calls the wholly unprecedented belief in virtual infinity. Accordingly, it is precisely this infinite sequence of solicitations and satisfactions that lead to a dependence never fully reached and plays the role of an addictive. It is precisely the virtual nature of technological experiences that hinders satisfaction and generates dependence, as can be observed, for instance, in addictiveness to pornography. And because of this desire for reality, the pleasure that is obtained virtually can never be truly satisfying. It is, as in our above analogy, similar to the leaking jars that can never be filled. Second point, a neoliberal and depressed society. We can give an account of another facet of this problem by considering what James Williams calls the persuasive design of technological tools. They are made to hold captive the user by exploiting his compulsive and addictive use. But persuasion, says Williams, is now industrialized. Since this very persuasion is salable, the stakes are mostly economic, but they are also anthropological. Indeed, the economy that surrounds attention and its virtual infinity reveals an aspect of the modern mind. All that is valuable is reduced to a quantifiable data, numerical, measurable, and indeed purchasable. Yet, this is precisely one of the effects of neoliberal politics, whose main thesis is the primacy of the just and fair over the good. Indeed, its fundamental axiom is that the only way modern societies can live in peace is to make sure that only the mechanics of law and markets may intervene, even if it is to the detriment of the good and the true. In this neoliberal context, however, the individual is no longer called to virtue, to glory, or to any form of interior heroism. Every hero figure someone who sacrifices himself for a greater good or for a profane or sacred ideal, is thereby destroyed and thrown out into the realm of heterogeneity, wondrousness, or absurdity. Take, for instance, Netflix superheroes, who are all superhuman, extraterrestrial, incompetent, or unlikely heroes. Called henceforth a consumer or a user, modern man is deprived of all intrinsic value and is reduced to a series of measurable and quantifiable qualities. To acquire market value, all of his interactions must now be quantifiable. The time he spends on internet, the number of his followers on Instagram, the like. All of these numbers are meant to describe an individual in the most precise way, so much so that his behavior might be understood, emulated, and even anticipated. By possessing all of his attention span, by holding captive his desire, deprived of his will and freedom, is now at the mercy of the technologies of power. This new slavery of desire, with its infinite capacity to satisfy, thus has the absence of ideal, of dream, and of transcendence as its inevitable corollary. In short, the desire for the infinite has been replaced by unending desire. Besides, as noted by the American sociologist Christopher Lasch, one of the features of postmodernity is that it does not offer the prospect of a wondrous world to come. It presents itself rather as being essentially infinite and unlimited. The world is not moving towards something better, but towards more technology, more information, and more exchanges. By captivating his own desire in order to make a profit, we might say that modern man has become anorexic without any desire and incapable even of desiring. Pornography has replaced love, Facebook has replaced real friendship, and Amazon has replaced concrete market displays. Our contemporary and liberal society is, in fact, Byung-Chul Han. Man becomes depressed because he suffers from his incapacity to achieve the imperatives of pleasure that are offered to him because they are infinite. This is so especially in a society where the desires that he is too feeble to satisfy are being constantly re-stimulated. Just as the sophists in the days of Socrates had reduced wisdom to a mere commodity, we could say that the modern orexists, or vendors of desire, have finally removed the very flavor that desire once possessed. Man, now a captive of technology, does not know any longer how to desire. Third point, the Socratic virtue as a unifying remedy for the soul. Another great sophist whom Socrates confronts is Protagoras. Like many of our contemporaries, Protagoras claimed that man is the measure of all things. in Plato's famous dialogue that bears Protagoras' name, we find many other enlightening elements for our present comparison. One in particular can be found Zeus, having been put in charge of handing out all kinds of attributes to the animals of the world, is at a loss when the turn comes to man. The poor human is left with neither feathers nor shells, neither velocity nor ferocity. However, in order that man may not fall helpless prey to other beings, Prometheus decides to make up for his brother's mistake, and so breaks into Athena's and Hephaestus' forge and steals the technological knowledge and the divine fire. He thereby gives to man the arts and skills of the gods. In the story of Protagoras, we see that men, now equipped with this divine gift, are nevertheless unable to live properly in a society. The technological powers seem to always set them one against the other. Seeing that humanity is about to destroy itself, Zeus intervenes and offers to it a remedy. This remedy are the divine virtues of respect, eidos, and justice, dike. The lessons in this myth are clear. However sophisticated it may be, technology can only help society provided it is accompanied by individual virtues. Here, we arrive at the heart of a Socratic doctrine that, to my mind, could surely be applied to our technology-obsessed society. Only virtue, that is, a rational capacity to tame and control through reason the solicitations of our desires, only virtue will be able lastingly to ensure the kind of unity of the soul that is a prerequisite for individual happiness and social life. Whether they are infinitely multiplied or instantaneously satisfied, sensitive pleasures cannot, in and of themselves, make a person happy. On the contrary, what brings happiness, following Socrates, is the virtuous control of these by the spiritual soul. The body and its desires are the only cause of wars and factions and battles, says Socrates. For all wars arise for the sake of gaining money, and we are compelled to gain money for the sake of the body. We are slaves to its service. And so, because of all these things, we have no leisure for philosophy. End of quote. To a morality based on pleasure, Socrates then responds with a morality based on the good. Truly satisfied. He talks here of a form of purification, which can also be understood as a sort of unification, which requires a detachment from sensitive pleasures for the benefit of the life of the spirit. Indeed, it is the latter that points to the divine part freeing ourselves from the foolishness of the body and being pure, we shall, I think, be with the pure and shall know of ourselves all that is pure and that is perhaps the truth. It was suggested by James Williams that we resist, as did Diogenes, the cynic, those who try to conquer our light. And it seems that there exists another path of struggle and resistance for our freedoms in front of the technological captivity, one which consists in personally adopting a Socratic attitude, that of the soul's virtue and the control of our desires. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Matthieu. So I will move straight on now to Gabor Ambrosh, who is a third member of our team. We also have a biblical scholar, but unfortunately she couldn't make it for our panel today. But we have the three of the four of us here. Gabor is has a very from Hungarian universities, but he also has a PhD in theology from KU Leuven. He's been involved with projects at our university before. For instance, we ran one called Foundational Reflections on Theology and Technology that he was the lead researcher in. And he's also currently a member of the research group for theology and contemporary culture in the Faculty of Protestant Theology of Charles University. So he has various research interests, but right now his main focus here is using his knowledge in religion and contemporary culture with a focus on contemporary technology. So I'm very happy now to hand over to Gabor for his.
Thanks for joining us this afternoon. Sister, may I ask whether you can hear and see me? Then I suppose everybody can.
Yes, we can hear very well and see very well. Thank you.
Okay. So in this paper I want to present this afternoon, I will attempt to present our contemporary situation, technological situation, in terms of technological totalitarianism. And I will also discuss why a certain focus on the individual is necessary if we want to face this technological totalitarianism we have in our time. At the end of the paper, finally, I will present the concept of nothingness as a possible response and a possible way to enter into a free relationship with the essence of contemporary technology, and especially information technology, which is the most important branch of contemporary technology. This free relationship with technology, with the essence of technology, is, of course, a Heideggerian concept, but it's very important because in my presentation and in the ideas I am developing in this paper, because it indicates that I don't think there is any salvation in our time outside technology or in a kind of non-technological space. So what I want to emphasize with this free relationship with the essence of technology is that if we seek freedom in our time, we can only find it within technology, not outside technology. Only in a kind of dialogue or in a kind of relationship that I call free relationship with the essence of technology. So in our moment of world history characterized by an increasingly tight technological totality in the life of society and over that of the individual, we face an enormous challenge. One can justifiably ask how unique and unprecedented our situation is in the first decades of our century. It can certainly be argued that we have been living in a technological age since the Industrial Revolution in the 18th century, and the challenges arising in the wake of this revolution were at least as unique and unprecedented as those we face now. The transition into an industrial society in the West in the 18th and 19th century, with its new economic and political reality, doubtless brought about something that may already be called a techno-economic totality in society, with far-reaching consequences for the individual. Nevertheless, it seems that despite the rise in the 19th century of Marxism as a revolutionary philosophy, declaring economic and technological change the very foundation of everything, it was possible for quite a while to think about various phenomena of human life authentically and truthfully without considering that change. It is also worth pointing out that for quite a while, up until the end of the 20th century, the economic and technological processes moved toward the creation of a mass society with its atomized individuals whose lives were defined by their very belonging to that mass. With the advent of the information age, with its pervasive digital technologies, modern technological society with its technological totality took a new turn. New technologies, with the internet at the forefront as a framework, came to be centered on the individual, which proved to be an individual as not in the totality of a network and not that of an undifferentiated mass. The new technologies of the individual and the self came to be tailored to each individual's needs, desires, and wishes by way of what came to be termed customization. Since the last decade of the 20th century, these technologies have pervaded everything that defines the life of the individual: work, entertainment, shopping, social life, all activities pertaining to society, economy, and culture. In the same vein, a new reality has dawned upon us. Thinking about technology and our reality as defined by technology has become unavoidable and inescapable, which means that no authentic and truthful theory of society and the individual is possible without a philosophy of, or at least a basic consideration about, that this totalitarianism has been in the making for centuries. So if this is so, the new technologies of the end of the 20th, end of the 21st century has brought a new emphasis into what totalitarianism means. Born and developed in the 20th century of the experience of ideological totalitarianisms like fascism and communism, this concept had two meanings. On the one hand, it meant the total organization of society, in which no segment or dimension of social life was spared the onslaught of politics and ideology. On the other hand, totalitarianism meant total domination over the individual, whose entire life proved to be determined by a political ideological movement and whose principal social bond in life was forced to be none other than the one to this movement. Now, despite the long cut in modernity of the individual and individualism in the West, if we consider techno-economic reality for most of the history of modern industrial society, the mass was its foremost is still meaningful in our society. The old conceptual interplay between the individual and the mass, by the inclusion and even absorption of the former in the latter, was to give way to one between the individual and the network, by the former in the manner of an individual's not making up the latter. In a personalized, customized, truly individual fashion. These considerations might justify the way in which I try to provide a philosophical and theological evaluation of the possibility of freedom in our time, namely, with a focus on the individual and the individual's case with information technology, and without presenting any kind of explicitly social theory. What I wish to discuss is premised upon the concept of nothingness, which is a profoundly dialectical concept, implying both the nature of our unfreedom and our chance of freedom in an age defined by information technology and social media. Insofar as our late modern technological society is a nihilistic one, the reality of nothingness rules supreme. What do nihilism to echo a related Nietzschean term, the devaluation of all values in a post-Christian society? In a sense, there has still remained one value, a single and pervasive one, the value of individual prestige, social validation, and professional success that can be interpreted as, to employ another Nietzschean term, the will to power. The individual will to power seemingly unfolds in a heightened activity of freedom. But this curious kind of freedom is enthralled to hyperactivity, performance, and an insane drive of self-exploitation, something that, in truth, looks like unfreedom. Such a furious vita activa, driven by the will to power, renders self-exploiting individuals masters and slaves at once. This is an idea of Byung-Chul Han, a South Korean philosopher. Of course, in reflection on Hegel's theory of the master-slave dialectic. So this is an insight, this furious vita activa driven by the will to power. This insight can be taken as one into the essence of the world of social media. The fierce striving and competition of individuals for validation and prestige on websites like Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter takes shape in an utterly quantified, fact-ridden, and positive environment. So much suffused is this environment with facts, numbers, items, and sheer positivity by its very design that an encounter with nothingness is indeed the last thing that we would expect from it. This positivity may in fact point towards something that we may single out as the principal feature, even the essence of information technology. Heidegger famously conceived of the essence of modern technology as enframing, that is Gestell in German, that is something like a positing within a frame. Accordingly, we may venture to say that the essence of information technology is itemization or diagrammatics. Informational items form a whole on the simple basis by means of the organic unity of a concept, but a technological system by way of a network, or, to put it visual terms, akin to the spirit of information technology, a diagram. The unity of such a network and diagram is simply correlational without any necessity, a superficial unity to which anything can simply be added at any time. Such a network or diagram certainly applies parts as units or items and the whole as a correlational conglomerate of them. But it is a conceptual hodgepodge, even if tightly knotted technologically, permeated with the nonsense and emptiness of the whole, indeed, constantly on the brink of falling apart and plunging into nothingness. At the same time, the very reality of itemizing, networking, and diagramming is the very fate of the self, of the striving and furiously active individual, who is totally enmeshed in the items and itemization of these networks and diagrams. Indeed, what emerges to this individual, closed up in his or her own self by technology, is an itemized or diagrammatic self, behind which nothingness never ceases to lurk. At this point, some elaboration on the concept of nothingness is in order. It entered Greek philosophy as a metaphysical concept quite early on, but where it had a truly significant career was Christian theology, in response to the early doctrine of God, creatio ex nihilo, creation out of nothingness, which eventually morphed with various mystical and heterodox thinkers into an understanding of nothingness as something like the deepest abyss of the Godhead itself. The deepest abyss, this deepest abyss as nothingness, came to be interpreted as a condition, a possibility, but not a cause of evil in God's creation. Even if the concept of nothingness underwent a process of secularization in the thinking of philosophers like Heidegger and Sartre, it can undeniably be claimed that those who think about nothingness think theologically. Or the mysterious notion of the Godhead made a great contribution. First, by dissociating nothingness from the concept of evil, and second, by understanding it phenomenologically rather than metaphysically. In the wake of Heidegger and Sartre's thinking, and of the experience of our contemporary technology, it remains an essential task for 21st century thinkers to think about nothingness, which means, again, to think theologically, by building upon Heidegger and Sartre's approach to it. By and large, Heidegger and Sartre's phenomenological approach presented nothingness as experienced in the modern phenomenon of anxiety. At the same time, however, the experience of boredom was also given a significant role in this respect, especially by Heidegger. And it is the latter concept that will prove particularly revealing in the encounter with nothingness in contemporary information technology and social media. I have already referred to the contemporary individuals distorted via activa as a life of hyperactivity and self-exploitation. This life doubtless implies an experience of nothingness by way of the phenomena of exhaustion and burnout. But this can hardly be a way to freedom. I suggest turning our attention to a counterpart of the frenzy of a life of activity with activa, a similarly distorted kind of contemplative life with a contemplativa that is none other than online entertainment, the main platforms of which are perhaps less Facebook or Twitter, even though the latter also features some of its elements, than websites like YouTube and Netflix. The entertainment of the individual on these platforms operates under the constant threat of boredom, and indeed, it happens in the very same individual's endless flight from boredom that is an experience of nothingness. The distinctly modern phenomenon of boredom, intimately linked with modern technological society, takes here a particular shape, characteristic of information technology and social media, and deeply related to their essence. Boredom means being lost in the itemization featured by these websites and within the diagram of countless videos, which is always on the brink of falling apart and, in moments and hours of boredom, in fact falls apart into nothingness. In the distorted vita contemplativa of the individual on platforms of online entertainment, the possible endurance of boredom and thereby nothingness is nothing less than an act and source of freedom. In such an endurance, the individual enters into a free relationship with the essence of information technology, that is itemization and diagrammatics. In such an experience, the essence of information technology comes to be disclosed, an experience and disclosure which comes from freedom and enters into freedom. In its own distorted way of a contemplative life, but at the point of a possible beginning of true contemplation, this experience of boredom as an event of freedom, in which the sheer positivity of items and itemization, as it were, goes adrift, is a far cry from any concept like freedom of choice between positive and fact-like options, and any freedom of will as the individual's property. So in conclusion, let me add that if these considerations about totalitarianism, nothingness, and freedom in the experience of contemporary information technology and social media open any way toward theology and God, they can only do it in the manner of a theological minimalism and utmost minimalism, which is in fact even less than any minimalism, the way of nothingness, through contemporary technology. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Gábor. So this is the end of our presentations, which took a bit longer than we hoped. I think we have just a few minutes left now. I don't know if anybody else on site, Uko, wants to give us a question. I've seen that there is a question in the chat.
Yes, yes.
On the Zoom,
Yes.
which we could look at briefly, unless there's something else that any of the organizers wants to bring up.
Yes, dear Sister Helen,
Thank you very much for
really insightful presentations and conversation. And I will even show you that during this time we already downloaded the book and the series of BBC lectures. Oh, we got so interested in that. And actually my colleague from the Analytical Center of Foucault, Ostap Krivdik, chair of Ukraine and the World program, found this information, and he does have a question. Ostap, I'll invite you to ask it personally.
Sister Helen, and here's this for the really thoughtful presentations on the matter. I want to get back to a couple of the issues. My 8-year-old son very often says to me, "I'm bored." And it happens especially often after he has to give up his iPad, because there it is interesting. Outside of it, it's not as interesting as it might have been. And my question would be a bit provocative. Islamic State has two ways of working. One of the ways is, of course, digital. This is the way they conduct their propaganda. And another way is completely undigital. So when they have to conduct their operations, they go offline. So foreign intelligence cannot trace them. And they are quite efficient in that. And it's very hard to tackle their activity. Starting with that provocation, so say learning from the enemies, how do we maintain this balance between the digital, the destructive, the distracting, and the connecting and the simplifying, and the undigital, the space where we switch off the phones and listen to ourselves, to God, to others, where we really can listen? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't know if one of my colleagues would like to reply to this. Otherwise, people widely shaking their hands. Okay, so, Gábor, you want to say? Go ahead, please. Yeah.
Oh, yes. Can you hear me now? Yes. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I mean, I know that it's a very common distinction. There is a very common distinction between offline and online, and I don't want to say that this is irrelevant. If you take a look at our time we spend online and offline in an analytical way, of course you can always say no, a person is online, no, he or she is offline, and of course it's possible to take a look at our technological situation that way, into our being enmeshed in information technology. But we take a look at human life lived in the information age, in contemporary society, in a holistic way. It will be clear, even if you put it in the terms of Islamic State or Islamic terrorism or Islamic action and so on, it's obvious that there is the boundary between the two is quite blurred, because I mean, even in moments and hours and days you spend offline, the influence, the defining reality of online life is undeniable. You know, if you think of the whole of human life or the whole of society, it's just impossible to draw this line or clear line between the two. And of course, the so-called online life is also deeply influenced by what we call offline. Okay, this is just what I wanted to say.
Thanks very much, Gábor. If maybe I could just add a comment specifically in relation to the first thing you said about the child feeling bored when he comes off his iPad. I mean, I think that is what we would expect, given the incredible amount of effort using some of the best minds in the world that are put into creating the most effective entertainment techniques that to keep that kid on the iPad and for him to feel when he's not on it that life is boring. Yeah, that's exactly the result that these companies want to get. And a little child is especially susceptible to that because they haven't been able to develop some of the techniques, the development that also Matthieu was talking about, you know, which is one of the possible responses, you know, to develop in virtue, to be able to be using these resources more effectively. Williams would also say, but it's really not good enough for us just to say we need to be virtuous when there is a massive system all being set up to try to break down but you know, we have to do better than that. It's not enough just to say that individuals need to be virtuous, even though we can't substitute for that. You know, if we don't try to do that as well, any other change won't really have the desired effect. But I think the example you give of your son is a perfect example. It over a longer time, when you begin to see how your life isn't going anywhere, really, it's not, you're not able to achieve anything, really. You know, that's where you start to see the real cost of it and the real sense of emptiness. I think we have probably come to the end of our session time. Is that right?
Unfortunately, this is actually the time where we need to finish this panel. Dear Sister Helen, thank you very much for wonderful moderation and deep insights. Dr. Raffray, Mr. Ambrus, thank you very much for your participation and sharing your ideas and thoughts. Thank you for this wonderful partnership within this conference. Thank you.